Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today for our second consultation call in collaboration with the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network. Today we're going to be talking about advanced topics in strengthening youth and young adult peer support. So we're going to be concentrating on talking about how do you have a genuine conversation about a young person's strengths, passions, achievements, and motivators, or as we sometimes like to abbreviate it, SPAM. Here is a lovely little map of all the different areas served by the MHTTC, and we are the little brown area in the top left corner, the Northwest MHTTC. But we welcome everyone who's coming from other places as well. So here is a little bit about the MHTTC and the directors of our particular area. We serve Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington in the Northwest MHTTC. And then the role and goals of the Northwest MHTTC, which is basically to provide technical assistance and disseminate information on evidence-based practices to providers. And then this is just a little bit from the website from the Northwest MHTTC, which we encourage you to check out, as well as sign up for their newsletter. There's a lot of great resources on there with past webinars, tools, practice briefs, online courses, different things you can access. And then we also like to call out before we start these that we encourage the use of affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in these webinars, and person-first language, non-judgmental, avoiding assumptions. So we would like, if we slip up, you can feel free to call us out, and vice versa, but we always assume best intent. So we'll do some quick introductions of who we are before we jump into this. That's me on the right. I'm Maria Hermsen-Kritz. I am a research assistant for Pathways at Portland State University and a trainer for our AMP curriculum. And that is my dog, Twinkie, and my cat, Clarence. We like to put our pets in here ever since we've been working from home and doing so much of these digital trainings. They seem to make appearances whether we like it or not. And then previous to me coming to PSU, I worked as a youth peer support specialist and also supervised other youth peers in a drop-in center environment, and also doing community-based peer support in the Portland area. Now let Caitlin introduce herself too.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Baird. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and that is me sitting in my favorite armchair with my cat, Jude, who is going to have her 14th birthday soon, and then my dog, Polo, who is sitting right next to me right now. And sometimes he's developed this new habit, y'all, of like walking underneath my desk and getting caught up in the wires. And so if you see my head just like jerk down, it's because he has caught my headphones. So just a heads up, don't be alarmed. That's probably what's going on. I am a program manager and trainer with the Pathways Research and Training Center. With Maria, I work on training and developing and improving our Achieve My Plan or AMP modules. We also have different trainings that are specific for peers, specifically one called Peers Learning and Using Skills Plus, or Peers Love Us, as I like to call it. And we also just create a lot of tools and different interventions that peers and other providers can use in order to really promote youth-driven practice. We work on the teams of Dr. Janet Walker, who I think is joining us today, but is just sort of watching and sitting in the background and getting to enjoy, hopefully drinking some coffee. Also, prior to coming to Portland State University, I was a youth peer support specialist. Maria and I actually worked at the same organization. And I worked specifically with youth and young adults in wraparound. And then I also was a supervisor for youth peers doing community-based work, drop-in center work, wraparound work, and was a wraparound and systems of care implementation trainer here in Oregon. I feel really privileged to be able to use some of the, what I considered at the time, not so positive experiences in my life and some of the challenges that I've had with my own mental health and other related systems trauma to be able to promote youth-driven practice and to build up the peer support workforce across the nation and really just be able to connect with peers and implement strengths-based framework for young people that we might be working with. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Caitlin. So this is just a little plug for our Pathways website. This is our research and training center, and we're putting this consultation call on in collaboration with MHTTC. But if you want to check out our Pathways website, we have a lot of great resources and tools there, and you'll also be able to find a recording of this webinar afterward there, and a lot of our previous webinars, as well as a lot of different tools you can use related to peer support and youth-driven practice. So yeah, check it out. So just a brief bit about logistics for these monthly consultation calls. They will always be on the third Thursday of the month at this time. We'll send out the registration ahead of time. We want to keep it around 30 participants, which I mean, I think we're well under that, so we're good to go. If you're unable to attend, try to let us know ahead of time in case, you know, we have extra registrants so we can open up those spots to people. And like I said, we will record these calls and make them available on our Pathways website. We ask that people, if you're sharing like scenarios or examples from your practice, just try to make sure they are, you know, confidential, or, you know, you remove identifying details about your young people or staff members or that kind of thing. Or if you'd like, you can submit them in the chat so we can, you know, confidentialize them. I don't think that's a word, but and then if you would like to also, please share any resources or questions or topics of interest with us, because we want to cover what's important to you. So we want to know, like, if there's future topics you'd like these consultation calls to cover, and we also want to be able to like learn from you all as well what resources we can put out there for people.
We also, just related to that, are accepting any scenarios or anything like that that folks want to go over. So we will be reviewing a couple of those at the end of this webinar, so you get kind of an idea of some of the things that we might touch on.
So here's our agenda for today. We're gonna go over, you know, what we mean when we talk about SPAM, strengths, passions, achievements, and motivators for young people. Talk about how you can introduce a conversation about strengths with a young person and how you can talk about strengths in a way that is youth-driven. Some common mistakes providers might make when having a conversation about strengths with a youth. We have a little bit of an activity. And then we will wrap up. We also have a few scenarios that we're going to throw in at the end as an example of like some stuff that you might want to bring to the call that we can all kind of debrief as a group. All right. So spam, what do we mean when we say spam? This is just kind of one of the themes that we developed as part of our AMP training that we think is really important to underlie any practice that you're doing with a young person. So like I said, it stands for strengths, passions, achievements, and motivators. And these are all the things that you really want to be eliciting and bringing to all the work that you do with a young person, right? So the theme of SPAM really focuses on how are you drawing out a young person's understanding of and appreciation of their own strengths, right? You're not telling them what you think their strengths are, or what you think they should be, or, you know, reframing their strengths into those more conventional strengths of like leadership or something like that, right? It's about eliciting the young person's ideas about their own strengths and passions and motivations, which can be a great way to build rapport, but also working to connect those to the rest of the work you do with a young person, like their goal setting, you know, and their planning to go out and do things, planning for their meetings, that kind of thing. So a question we had for you all was, what are some ways that you incorporate a young person's strengths or your knowledge of their strengths into the work you do with young people? I guess we didn't really say, you can feel free to chat your answers in, or I guess also just shout them out. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you can chat, you can call it out. If we have a brave soul who wants to be the first person, we appreciate that. Thank you.
Treatment planning and individual sessions usually guide them to come up with them on their own as well. Yeah, that's great. Have them ask friends to list some strengths. Okay, yeah, I think that's a that's a good strategy too. You know, it can be awkward for young people to think of their own strengths, so thinking about it from a friend's point of view can be a really good way to, you know, help take them out of that awkward, self-conscious place of thinking about their own strengths.
For sure. I think that's a good way to learn about their natural supports too, if that's something that you're trying to do for their treatment planning.
Good point. Anyone else have any thoughts about having conversations about strengths or connecting a young person's strengths to other parts of your work with them? Susan says, like to have them make a list of what they think are strengths in general, then after it is done, have them pick one or two that fit them. Oh, that's kind of a fun idea. Yeah, just like what are strengths in general, and then which ones might apply to them. Yeah, I like that. Never heard of that one before. Well, thank you all for sharing. Okay, looks like we have another poll here. How comfortable do you feel talking about youth with their strengths? Or talking to youth about their strengths? I do love the SpongeBob gif.
He's so strong. This was the hardest part of the building the presentation. I was like, is it strong SpongeBob or is it going to be Dwayne the Rock Johnson? And I was like, we're going to go with strong SpongeBob.
Good choice.
So it looks like almost everybody has voted, and most folks are very comfortable or somewhat comfortable, which that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
I think we'll give the people just one more minute. Okay.
Wow, okay, so it looks like everyone was in the somewhat comfortable and very comfortable. So that's great. Nobody was uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. So it looks like everyone has a lot of experience having these kinds of discussions with young people. So hopefully we can keep learning from, all of y'all's experience and pick up some new tips and tricks about how to have these conversations with young people, which can sometimes be uncomfortable, at least for them. So on that note, many young people have been asked to list their strengths so many different times in so many different contexts that it can feel like a chore or it might feel uncomfortable for different reasons. So we wanted to get some perspectives from you all. Why might youth feel reluctant to talk about their strengths?
Okay, so we'll start off with the strengths exploration.
Oh boy.
How do you feel about that? That oh boy sounds a little apprehensive.
Always when I think about like strength, it's kind of hard for me to like come up with something due to the fact that I always talk very negatively of myself with my depression and whatnot.
Definitely.
But I mean, it's always cool to like put them on paper. It gives a whole new perspective about it. Like, holy crap, maybe I don't suck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be really awkward to think about.
So that was one example that this young person brought up of why it can be kind of weird to talk about strengths. He said, it's hard because I usually think pretty negatively about myself. So, but it's kind of different to put them on paper because I think, holy crap, maybe I don't suck. So maybe this will be cool. But I think that negative self-talk or that natural inclination to kind of self-deprecate can be one reason why it can be awkward for young people. Are there any other reasons? Let's see, somebody. Don't believe they have strengths or feel like it is just adults being nice. Yeah, definitely. It can feel vulnerable, like the person you tell your strengths to will disagree. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really vulnerable process of sharing your strengths. Like, am I bragging about myself or, do I have to prove this now? Anyone else have any thoughts? Having trouble thinking of strengths, only thinking about weaknesses. Yeah, and perhaps it may be due to peer pressure. They may not want to focus on aspects such as that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I worked in the drop-in center, it was just like a lot of, oh, I'm just a piece of garbage, and that was just kind of the the general tone of the way the young people joked with each other there, So I think like talking about your strengths was definitely not the cool thing to do. Well, those are all great points.
Sorry about that little tech mishap there. So it sounds like, we're all pretty comfortable in how we're talking about strengths with youth. But we also know that there are reasons why youth might be reluctant to do that. And it can just be pretty uncomfortable. And I know for my part, when I was a young person, and even as an adult who might be seeking some sort of mental health treatment, a lot of the times when people ask you to do a strengths inventory, it feels really unnatural and a little awkward. And sometimes it can be hard to really think of those functional strengths, right? So we want to make sure that when we're talking about strengths, we're not focusing necessarily on not even really just like what are things that the youth likes about themselves, but we want to reframe it to, what are your values? What do you feel like you've accomplished? What motivates you? And that's really a way that we can unearth some of these more functional strengths within youth. So you want to keep it conversational. It's always easier if you feel like there's trust and rapport there and a little bit of mutual respect. So asking some open-ended questions like, what are some of your hobbies? What would your friends say you're good at? Which I saw was already brought up, which I think is really cool, getting them to think outside of the box a little bit. What are some of your accomplishments? Even just getting into questions like, what is something that you've done that was hard for you? It doesn't necessarily have to look like #winning, but it's things that get the young people to think about what are some things that they've accomplished, that they care about, and that motivates them. So I know that we sort of brought up before, what are some ways that you talk about strengths with young people? But I'm wondering, are there ways that you talk with young people that helps keep it conversational?
I saw a really good example in a video someone submitted for one of our AMP trainings, where she said, you know, you're so humble, so I know you're not going to say this about yourself, but try to think about, you know, what would your mom say about you? You know, and he was like, you know, she would say I'm a really hard worker. And like, I thought it worked really well, to similar to what would your friends say, but it, I guess the mom was kind of a different perspective.
Yeah, so getting the perspective of their natural supports. In our chat, we have, so Kendall said, oh, use appropriate humor. For a second, Kendall, I thought you said use inappropriate humor. And I'm like, I'm all about inappropriate humor. But yes, no, like developmentally and professionally appropriate humor. But I think that that's a huge one. It really helps break down those walls. Christopher says, share your own hobbies and conversations. Snaps, totally, especially as peers, right? If we're in that peer support role, being able to share a little bit maybe about our own experience and talking about strengths, our own hobbies, not making it a one-side conversation. Susan says stories. I love that. And especially eliciting stories from the young person, because that's a really good way to find some strengths that they might not even be consciously thinking of that they have, right? And then Kayla asking about experience with sports, clubs, jobs, volunteers, to bring out interests and strengths from those. Totally. And then you also get a little bit of a sense of like, how are they already participating in their community? What are some things that they feel like they are good at, that they're already doing? These are all great ones, you guys. And I think that these are especially good ones for peer support specialists to be using, though anybody can use them.
I think with that, like last one too, especially like, it really brings up the point that you're going to get a much better idea of the young person's strengths if you really focus more on just keeping it as a conversation rather than we're going to make a list of strengths. You know what I mean? So, you know, if they start talking about like, well, I'm really good at soccer, just start having a conversation about soccer instead of, you know, saying, okay, well, what else is your strength? You know what I mean? Because if you're going to have a much richer conversation and more things are going to emerge if you just keep it conversational, like you said, and ask those follow-up questions.
Yeah, and nobody really wants it to be like, okay, you're good at soccer. What else? Because then they feel like they're not being listened to, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're using that to start that conversation, and really that they're the one identifying the strengths. Anyway, we'll get into common mistakes. This is what happens when we lead. We just get into a whole conversation about it. Allie says, asking about what types of activities, relationships, and situations make them feel connected, empowered, proud, or excited. Totally. That absolutely like connects to passions, achievements, and motivations, right? And the reason that we want to frame strengths that way is because that's how we're going to figure out what is going to work for the young person and what is it that they want to go out and accomplish and do. Great responses, everybody. Okay, so common mistakes when discussing strengths. And I just want to normalize, I know I've done all of these. I think I actually coined the pit of awesome because I realized that I was doing this. So this is following up everything that the young person might be talking about in terms of their interests, passions, achievements, and motivations with cool, great, awesome. So we have a little GIF here. I'm sure that you've seen well, if you haven't seen the Lego movie, they have this really obnoxious song called Everything is Awesome. And yeah, so sometimes you have to stop pretending that everything is awesome because then you're not actually going to be assisting the youth with anything. You're just there to be a cheerleader when sometimes that's not what they need. Also, highlighting or overemphasizing certain strengths that reflect your preference, values, or agenda. I think that this can be a hard one to avoid because the bottom line is we're people too. There are certain things that we like, but we need to make sure that we're really centering our attention on what the young person is wanting to talk about or what they're passionate about. I know a personal example that I have is I was working with a young person who was looking to get into more like physical activity, and they identified yoga as one of those things. And I immediately like lost my stuff and was just like, I love yoga. Yeah, let's do that. And they ended up doing that because they were really trying to please me rather than focusing on what it was that they wanted to do. So that's something that we want to try and avoid, right? We want the young person to be really identifying things that are valuable to them. You want to try to avoid making suggestions about what you think the young person's strengths are. A lot of this, I think, comes from some nervousness when we feel like young people are reluctant to identify their own strengths rather than us stepping in and telling them like, well, I think you have a really nice smile, or I see that you're really kind. We want to make sure that they are reflecting on these things internally within themselves rather than us kind of putting it on them. Because frankly, when that happens, and I think it happens to young people who are in services a lot, oh gosh, see, my dog just did it, y'all. But I think what happens is young people kind of feel like it's BS. Somebody mentioned before, it's just adults being nice. Yeah, I think that that's what resonates with them. So we really want to avoid making those suggestions before building that rapport with the young person and really making sure that they're identifying valuable things within themselves. You also want to avoid making leading reflections or asking leading questions. So these are sort of reflections and questions that apply a right answer, right? So it might be something like, well, I think that you are really good at soccer. Would you call yourself a good athlete? Like, that's sort of prompting the young person to respond with a yes, right? Because they're not going to want to disagree with our statement. So you want to make sure that you're sort of avoiding doing that as well. And then I think that this was mentioned before, but reframing a young person's strengths into more traditional or conventional strengths, where I actually saw this happen a lot in my work with young people, was if young people were bringing up something that they weren't feeling great about, right? They were like, hey, this is happening. This kind of sucks. And then it was reframed for them in a way that was usually labeled as resilience, right? I think we see that a lot, or leadership, or things of that nature. And I think that we want to be mindful of not doing that unless the young person is really reflecting on their own resilience, leadership, or recovery. Because oftentimes when we do that, what we're really doing is like sugarcoating the topic that they might be needing to talk about. So before we go on to tips and techniques, I'm wondering, are there other common mistakes that people have noticed either as somebody who's received services or within their own practice? Okay. Well, if anything dawns on anybody, feel free to throw it in the chat, or honestly, you can interrupt me. I don't mind. So some tips that we offer, and I think that these are generally pretty natural things that peers are already doing, but you want to be able to normalize with the young person. Normalize that it can be hard for people to talk about strengths. It can feel a little weird. I think that we actually saw sort of a nice example of that in the video clip that was played earlier, which also, in case it was distracting to anybody, like, yes, spoiler alert, that was Maria in the video clip, but that was Maria back in the day when we worked at a youth peer organization. So yeah, just Maria with a beanie and longer hair. But so you want to normalize that it can be hard for folks to talk about strengths. It can feel uncomfortable. In normal conversation, people aren't generally asked to make like a list of their strengths or whatever. And that's why you also want to keep it conversational with them. This doesn't have to be like something that you're checking boxes on, and it doesn't have to be a master list. And it's really something where you're going to discover more of what lights the youth up and what they are passionate about when you are having a conversation with them. So instead of asking questions like, what are your strengths, which I think it can put people on the spot a little bit, asking questions like, what do you enjoy doing? What might other people say you're good at? We had some really good examples in the chat of asking people about their past experiences with things like work, school, or volunteering. I think that is a more natural way for young people to actually reflect on their experiences. And it's really reflecting on those experiences that are going to help them identify strengths. And then finally, we recommend that you just go with it. If you're working with youth, we all know that sometimes the conversation can kind of take a direction into left field. Rather than trying to take a hard turn back right, just let them talk about it, because you never know what kind of valuable things are going to come out of that conversation. And clearly, if the young person is leading the conversation in this direction, we want to make sure, as good youth-driven practitioners, that we are following them over there. And if needed, you can always bring it back with a good open-ended question or reflection on something that they had mentioned previously or something connected to the topic at hand. I think a good common example that I experienced in where using this technique was really useful is that young people would often identify a hobby or interest as something that was online or video games or something of that nature. And if I asked follow-up questions about that, like, oh, what games do you like to play? And like, do you like to do individual play or do you play with teams and things like that? You would learn a lot about the young person's world and things that they value a part of these games, whether it be the art design or, the action orientation or being able to connect with other people around the world. And that's a really great way to identify strengths that they might not even be labeling themselves, right? So just go with it is a really highly recommended tip and technique to use when you're in these conversations with young people. Okay, so next we're going to go through a little activity. I think for the sake of time, we're not going to do the whole thing, but this is an activity that you can find on our Pathways Research and Training Center website, which I threw up in the chat, and we'll make sure to throw it in the chat at the end as well. This just provides some examples of some good ways and maybe some not so good ways to talk with young people about their strengths. So you will see this module go through on your screen. And I encourage you, when the module takes a pause at each point, to please put in the chat box or respond verbally with what you think maybe could have been done differently, or just what you're noticing about the young person's reaction or anything maybe that you would do in your practice. So you see here, we have the provider saying, hi, Amelia, good to see you today. So we're here to get a list of your strengths, skills, talents, things you're good at. Okay, let's begin. So here's a little diagnostic on why this might not be so great. Does anybody have any sort of reflections on why that might not be a great tactic to use? Oh, we've got a couple in the chat. Oh yeah, some great points here. So Kendall says getting right to the point isn't very welcoming. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable first. Totally. If you're walking in, you're like, cool, this is what we're doing today. That doesn't feel super great. And also, I think it's not super youth driven, right? We want to make sure that the young person is like down to have this conversation, not just telling them what they're going to do. We also have a comment, and I apologize that I don't want to mispronounce your name, but it says it's too forward. There needs to be building engagement and trust first. Absolutely. If I just had some random provider be like, so what do you think you're good at? I'm like, I don't know, dude. I mean, I don't know what to talk to you about. Sometimes you're worried about being judged there, right? Susan says, don't jump in, introduce yourself and get to know them. Yeah, and I think it's important that young people feel like they know a little bit about us too before they have to be asked to be really vulnerable and talk about these things. Christopher makes a good point. Not a conversation. Seems more agenda driven than relationship building. Snaps to that. I totally agree. It's us coming in with our own agenda rather than being like, oh, I want to make sure that I'm building rapport with this young person. And Josh again brings up a good point. The youth might not feel that they have any strengths. Sometimes when we're coming in saying, what are your strengths? That can be a really loaded word, which is why in this module, we try to reframe that as what are their passions, achievements, motivations. So here we have the provider saying, hi, Amelia. So today I'm hoping to start out with a conversation to explore some of the things that you find enjoyable, motivating, and worthwhile. That'll help me learn more about your strengths and values. And later on, we can use that information to make sure that plans and goals we work on together reflect who you are and what you want. Does that sound okay? What do folks think about this piece of dialogue that the provider is offering?
Well, she did a good job of checking in with the young person if that was okay with her.
Yeah, I agree. Kendall has a good response where they said too much info at once. It can sound like a lot of info there, right? But I agree with Maria where it's more about checking in to see if that's what they want to work on and framing strengths as something enjoyable, motivating, and worthwhile rather than kind of leaving it open-ended.
I also like that she said this is why we are doing this, so it's not just like this is so we can make sure your plan is youth driven or whatever. So it's not just like we're just doing an activity just for the sake of doing it and you have no idea what the purpose is or why or you know what the meaning behind it is, as more transparency.
Exactly. So here we also have a question from the provider. They say, so what are some things that you enjoy doing? And I think that we've sort of talked about this. So we see that this is a good prompt for them to go in and talk to the young person about what they want to do. But where they messed up is they fell into the pit of awesome, right? We don't want to just label everything as cool, awesome, whatever. We want to be asking those follow-up questions, making reflections, and holding a conversation with the youth. So for the sake of time, we're going to move on from this activity, but we will send it up in a follow-up email so that y'all can practice on your own. We have a bunch of e-learning tools on our website that are all totally free and are all really driven towards what does youth-driven practice look like. Thank you all for participating.
All right, so we also just have a video taken from one of our trainings, and this is a provider doing a conversation about strengths with a young person they're working with. So we just wanted to watch this and then just think about what are some of the things they might be doing well in having this conversation, and then what are some of the things they might be doing not so well, or some places they could improve.
Yeah, like you can go over those questions. Like, what do you enjoy doing? What are some of your accomplishments? Like, what are you most proud of?
Okay, Jody's ready now.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, talk slowly, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
Okay. What I enjoy doing is spending time with family and friends.
Ooh, that's really sweet.
And I also like
You can like list them out if you want to, or you can keep like writing them in a sentence. Whatever you want to do.
Okay. Too. I also like to play volleyball.
Really?
Yeah.
I used to play volleyball in high school. I loved it. That's really cool that you play volleyball.
And I also like to play outside a lot.
Yeah, like you can go over those questions. Like, what do you enjoy?
Sorry, talk slowly, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
Okay. What I enjoy doing is spending time with family and friends.
Ooh, that's really sweet.
And I also like
You can like list them out if you want to, or you can keep like writing them in a sentence. Whatever you want to do.
Okay. Too. I also like to play volleyball.
Really?
Yeah.
I used to play volleyball in high school. I loved it. That's really cool that you play volleyball.
And I also like to play outside a lot.
I like your handwriting.
It's my messy handwriting.
You know what strengths like I think you're good at? I think you're really outgoing. Just from like our time together. I think you're really like friendly and really sweet. Do you think you're good at those things?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, add those if you want, or it's up to you.
Do I just write them out?
I mean, I think you're good at them, but it's up to you. You can put whatever you want down.
Okay, so what were some things people either noticed that were going well or were going not so well in that video?
What were some of the strengths people noticed? No pun intended.
Okay, Kendall says she told her what she thought the youth's strengths were before they reflected on it themselves. The volleyball comment was kind of a leading statement. She could have expanded on what the youth mentioned they like. For example, asked what they enjoyed about volleyball or spending time with family. Yeah, all great points, I think. Yeah, because when she she kind of did what we talked about, right? Like emphasizing one strength over the other, like Caitlin did with yoga, right? You know, she was really into volleyball. So, you know, that could lead the young person. That's kind of just a way of inserting your own values in the conversation, right? And I love what you said about instead expanding on what the young person likes about volleyball, drawing that up from the youth's perspective instead. Also, I like what you said about, you know, she inserted her own ideas about what the youth's strengths were before letting the young person even finish saying her own ideas, right? The provider interrupted the youth and didn't follow up. Yeah, I think that there was some interrupting going on there, and you know, that can come from nervousness with these kinds of things too. It seemed like the whole thing felt a bit rushed and paced. Yeah, and someone else pointed out she seemed to need to fill the space with words. So yeah, I think that kind of thing can happen from anxiety, you know, when we're having these conversations. I like that the provider was reassuring, but I would stay away from the words she chose, like sweet, even though she may be. Regardless, she was supportive and patient with helping the youth write her list and reassuring and encouraging her. Yeah, definitely. It seemed like they had like a positive relationship and rapport built before this, and I think you could see that.
Great responses, everybody.
Yeah.
I
Y'all
can
nailed
definitely
it.
see why like everybody is either very comfortable or comfortable working on youth with strengths. So before we move on from spam and get into our scenarios, do folks have any like last questions or comments about doing strengths-based practice with youth? Okay. Well, next we're going to get into a couple of scenarios. So before each call, we send out emails to folks checking in with them to see if there's any kind of consultation that they need. And these are a couple of scenarios that we've gotten. And so we decided to focus on these because we think that they are probably either, if not the most universal, definitely things that if they pop up, you are in a sticky situation and we want to just cover what might need to be done. So scenario number one, a young person I am working with told me last week that they are developing feelings for me. This makes me uncomfortable and I don't think I can provide peer support if they have a crush on me. I am only one of 2 youth peers in my agency, so there aren't a lot of alternatives for my youth client. What should I do? Maria, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
I'll start. Well, I think this happens all the time in the youth peer support world. It's happened to me. It's happened to almost all of my staff, I think. And I think, you know, the first thing to do is just talk to your supervisor and make them aware that this is happening like immediately after you want to call your supervisor and let them know. And I mean, I think almost always it's going to be the case that you're going to probably end up switching this young person to the other peer support. I mean, in this case, it sounds like there's 2, so at least there's one other one, right? But I think it's just for ethical reasons and for boundary reasons, it doesn't seem like you're going to be able to, you know, provide good peer support in this situation. But I also think it's important to have that conversation with the young person where it's like, listen, like this is normal, you know, you're not wrong for, you know, feeling this way, but just for all of our safety and etc., you know, and you can prepare with your supervisor and probably have them there for that conversation as well. This like we're gonna switch you over to whoever the other one is, and hopefully they're cool too.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, just in addition to taking all of those action steps after the youth shares this with you, be prepared for if a young person comes to you and says this with what you're going to say, which the first thing that you have to do is set that boundary, right? So I love what Maria said about, you know, you don't want to shame them. Say like, I understand. This is, you're not in trouble for feeling this way, but due to our relationship as a youth peer support specialist and a youth client, you'll probably have to start working with somebody else. And I'm going to get in touch with my supervisor to talk about next steps. We want to be transparent with young people about stuff like that. But we want to make sure that we're setting that boundary right away once the young person sort of divulges this information. Okay, our next scenario. I am working with a transgender youth and their family does not know. Because of COVID restrictions, all of our work is via telehealth and they are not comfortable talking openly in their home for fear that their parents will hear us. Any suggestions? Well, I know something that Maria and I have coached other peers on, especially with telehealth, that if there's anything that young people want to share that maybe can't be shared in with their family, if they don't have a private place to go, whether that's taking a walk outside, going to the car, whatever it might be, making sure that you guys come up with code words for different, I think, levels of safety. So for instance, if you're talking with this young person and maybe you're talking about accessing LGBTQ plus resources, then their mom comes home or walks in the room, they would have a word that they would say to you that indicates that it's time to change the subject, right? That way you are doing your best to respect their confidentiality and their safety and honor that they're not out to their parents yet while still trying to support them. Is there anything that you would add, Maria?
Yeah, I mean, I think just one thing is to have like a conversation anticipating the situation. Okay, what would happen if your parents were to find this out, just in case? I think that's always a good, like, to have a backup safety plan, a plan B. And also, just there are other things you can do, like doing texting or talking with the young person while they're walking or they're in their car or something. I mean, there's different workarounds you can do depending on the situation. But yeah, I think the code words that you said are can be really helpful just to maintain, confidentiality for them and that emotional safety.
Yeah. And we do have a resource regarding working with youth in telehealth on our website that we can send out after this webinar as well. Okay, well, that's our wrap up. We have 1 minute left. Does anybody have any questions? All right, well, you will receive a follow-up email with my information. And so you can always send me an email about questions or scenarios that you want to submit for next time. We will also try and include all of the resources that we discussed today, including a link to the e-learning tools, as well as the telehealth tool that we have on our site. And you will receive an email too that has a survey link and just asking for feedback. We're always looking to improve. So please just take a little bit of time out of your day to complete that survey, and that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and if you have any ideas for topics you would like us to cover next month, please let us know.
Absolutely. So the survey link has been shared in the chat box already. This is what the post survey looks like. You will also get it in an email. And if you want to access any other resources for MHTTC, this is where you can find it. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Great talking with you all.
Bye.